Valerie Cushman, Senior Director of Inclusion Initiatives and Alumni Engagement at William & Mary. Looks like we have about 26 people on our conversation today, and really excited to continue our series around women in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and to thank our partners at VIMS for collaborating with us on this effort. So today we are welcoming Dr. Mary Fabrizio. She's a professor and department chair in the Fisheries Science Department at VIMS, Virginia Institute of Marine Science. She was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and grew up in and around New York City. She received her undergraduate degree in biology from Fordham and completed her PhD in biological oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. Her research interests focus on the relationship between fish and their habitats. Mary was the first female professor and subsequently the first female department chair within the Fisheries Science Department at VIMS. She also served as the sixth female president of the American Fishery Society from 2007 to 2008. Joining us as well is Sally Brooks, the Assistant Director of Advancement, Outreach, and Engagement at VIMS. And I thank you both for sharing your time and talents with us today. And I will turn the program over to you.
Hi, I'm Mary Fabrizio. You see I'm wearing my topi and I have my ceremonial scarf that was presented to me in Nepal. So I'll take this off for the talk, but I just wanted to honor you with that. All right, let me start my screen. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the Virginia Institute of Marine Science before we talk about Nepal. As you can see, the Institute is located on the banks of the York River near the Coleman Bridge. We're in Gloucester Point, which is about 30 minutes or so from the main campus in Williamsburg. VIMS is one of the largest marine research and education centers in the United States, and it is one of the most respected anywhere. I've traveled all over the world, and I can tell you that people know VIMS from far and wide. We are home to William & Mary School of Marine Science, which is one of the top estuarine and coastal marine science training programs in the world. And I think you recognize the little guy on the bow there of one of our research vessels. Our mission is to seek and to broadly communicate knowledge in marine and coastal science to the Commonwealth of Virginia, the nation, and the world. And we do this through research, education, and advisory service. We advance understanding of marine environments through research, and then we translate those findings into practical solutions that benefit marine life and also coastal communities. We educate the next generation of marine researchers, educators, and managers, and we bring public educational programs to tens of thousands of community members each year. And I really like this very young budding fisheries scientist. You can tell that very interested in sharks here. All right, well, that brings us to the discussion today, which is going to be about an expedition that we took to Nepal. And before I start that, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Troy Tuckey, who is a scientist who has been working with me for about 10 years or so, and Bhaskar Nepal, who was at the time one of my PhD graduate students. So you might be wondering, why is someone at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science talking about work in Nepal? Here's Nepal. It's a landlocked country. There's no ocean nearby. So just to point out, we're talking about this small country that is in between India and China. And the way it all started is this story that my graduate student likes to tell. And it was back in March of 2018 when he and I traveled to San Juan, Puerto Rico to attend one of the Fisheries Society meetings there. And at the time we were chatting, and I asked Bhaskar, so you're coming to the conclusion of your PhD studies, and what would you like to do once you finish? What is it that you want to achieve with all the knowledge you're gaining? And he looked at me and he said, well, you know, I'm really learning a lot about marine science, and I'm really amazed at how much I've learned about fisheries science. But he says, with all that I know about that, he says, I know nothing about the fishes in my own country, and his country is Nepal. And so I said, well, maybe we can change that. Why don't we go to Nepal and do some fisheries research there? So we pulled together, the three of us, and decided to consider this opportunity. And so when you're thinking about a research project in science, there's three things you need. You need people, you need money, and you need a great research idea. So we had the three of us. We started to pull in some resources. I had received a Plumeria Award for Faculty Excellence, and that really kickstarted this whole project. Vasca received a Dean's Fellowship. Troy got some money from the Staff Development Fund, and then I applied for and received a Reeves Faculty Fellowship for International Research. So with all this in mind, we set about thinking about the project. And one of the first questions we have to know about is, what do we know about the fishes of Nepal? But maybe I should rephrase that and say, what do we not know about the fishes of Nepal? So as a scientist, the first thing we do when we think about a new project is to search the World Wide Web. And we did that. We searched the Web of Science, and we found that there are only 77 entries for fishes of Nepal. And that's ridiculously small. If I give you an example of striped bass, I just did this search the other day, 3,500 entries just for striped bass. So we don't know very much about fishes of Nepal. In fact, most of what's been published are simple inventories of fishes. Mostly, these are fishes from very small streams. And the western part of Nepal in particular is not well studied at all. And there's a good reason for that. It's pretty wild out there. And then finally, most of the publications used what we call non-standardized sampling methods. So these are not methods that will allow us to compare abundance or diversity across ecosystems. So these are not very helpful to us at all, in fact. And so we started to think about some of the features of Nepal. And one of the important features is that there are a lot of national parks in Nepal. This is a map of Nepal. The green areas show you the location of the national parks. So let's talk first about the country. The country is 56,000 square miles, and they have protected about 20% of that, so 11,000 square miles of protected areas. Now, to give you a comparison, the Chesapeake Bay watershed area, which is down here on the lower left in gray, is about 64,000 square miles, so just slightly bigger than the whole country of Nepal. Now, whereas you could drive maybe from Richmond or from Virginia Beach up to the Finger Lakes region in New York in, say, about 8 hours, there is no way you could even drive from Kathmandu here in the square down to this park in 8 hours. The roads, the mountains are formidable. So this is a small country, but it takes a long time to get from point A to point B. So what are these national parks protecting in Nepal? This is taken from the website of one of the national parks, and it says, this park is especially renowned for its protection of one-horned rhinos, Royal Bengal tigers, and gharial crocodiles. Well, this is really what these parks are set up to do. They're set up to protect what we call charismatic megafauna, and not so much aquatic life, with the exception of this gharial crocodile, which uses aquatic habitats. There is no mention of fish in any of the websites for any of these parks. So we wondered ourselves, well, do these national parks in Nepal effectively conserve the biodiversity of fishes? They're conserving biodiversity of large mammals, but what about fishes? And so we had two questions really we wanted to ask. One is to compare the diversity of fishes inside the park and outside the national parks. And we did this with this sort of cartoon here that I have at the bottom. You see if this green blob, dark green blob, is the national park. Here you see the river running through it. Around the park is a buffer zone. This is what is used to manage these parks. In the national park, there is no hunting, no fishing, no removing of resources. The buffer zone allows some removal, and then the outside, well, that's a free-for-all. So we looked at the diversity of fishes inside the parks, in the buffer zones, and outside the parks. The other aspect we wanted to consider was, how do human population centers affect fish abundance, fish composition, and health? So these were our two research questions. Now, I'm not going to get into too much of the detail here because I know that that's probably not too much of interest to you. So we'll talk more about what logistics and challenges that we had, and then also the fishes and the people of Nepal. So a little bit more background about the country of Nepal. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very mountainous country. You can see here in this color-coded map that there's a high variation in terms of that elevation. We go all the way from Mount Everest, which is located here in the northeastern part of the country, at the highest peak on the planet, down to the region here in brown called the Terai. And this is the area where we worked in. This is basically almost at sea level. It's anything below 3,000 feet. They call these, in yellow, the middle hills. Hills are up to 3,000 meters high. That's not a hill in the United States, but nevertheless, this is quite a mountainous country, and you see the river systems there. One thing to point out about these river systems is that they all enter India, and they flow into the Ganges River. And then the Ganges River, of course, empties into the Bay of Bengal. This is a map showing you the human population density, and the light colors, the white and the yellows, are low population densities, and the dark reds are the higher population densities. These are all relative, of course. In areas like Kathmandu, it's really highly densely populated, and you can see in some of these other areas, much less so in terms of human populations. These white areas are national parks where there are no humans living there year-round. So a little bit more about our study area. We selected these two national parks, Bardia National Park in the western part of Nepal, and Chitwan National Park just south and west a little bit of Kathmandu. So this is Chitwan and Bardia National Parks. These are the river systems that are associated with the parks, and you'll hear me talk about these rivers. So I'd like to point them out now. This is the Karnali River here. This is the Babai River, the Naraini River, and the East Rapti River. And what you see is that you have a lot of rivers that are draining these glacial mountains, the upper Himalayas, and draining down into the Ganges. But you also have these rivers that run east-west, like the East Rapti and the Babai. These rivers are not fed by mountains, they're fed by springs. And so they're completely different in terms of the types of habitats and the amount of water and how variable the flow might be. So here's our research team. We realized that we could not go to Nepal without some folks from Nepal who could help us there. And so we connected with some colleagues who helped us with this project. So here is Rahul Ranjan. He is a professor at one of the universities near Chitwan National Park. Krishna is one of his students, and Hemanta is an ecologist who specialized in birds, but he knows a lot about these ecosystems. And so these were the folks who helped Bhaskar, Troy, and me get through all sorts of interesting hurdles in this new country for us. And like every good research expedition, we had our own little logo. We called ourselves Nepal Fish Facts. We were looking at functional assessment and counts of Terai species. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but that was our logo, and that's a beautiful needlefish. So let's start looking at some of the logistics and other challenges that we faced as we were trying to do our research there in Nepal. The first challenge, this was even before we left the United States, was don't get sick. And the reason for this is because this part of the world has high rates of malaria, Japanese encephalitis, and several other nasty things, Hep A, Hep B, Hep C. We got vaccinated for all of this to the tune of about $3,000 worth of vaccines before we even set foot on the plane because we did not want to get sick. And here you see a picture of, on the left here, this is the first aid kit that we put together. It was huge. It was 2 suitcases worth of all sorts of things that you can imagine. Mainly, it was sunscreen and bug spray and all sorts of medications for GI problems and splints and just bandages, all sorts of those things. On the right there, you see one of the rooms that I stayed in. So there is the mosquito netting that we slept under every night because there are many bugs. There are very large bugs, and there are bugs that I don't even know what they do. The second challenge was to avoid deadly wildlife once we got out into the wilderness. Here's a photograph of Bhaskar taking a photograph of a tiger paw print. And as we were in this park, the guide came up and he saw this and he said, "Oh, that's great. That's very fresh." And I thought, oh, I'm not comfortable now. So there's a lot of deadly wildlife out there. This can kill you. 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 And this can kill you. We saw all of these, but we didn't, fortunately, we never got bit by any of the mosquitoes. We definitely used our DEET. Another challenge was to stay cool. Now you might think of Nepal as a country with very high mountains and glaciers where it must be very, very cold, and it is up there, but there are parts of Nepal that can be very hot. These 2 images are images of the jungle that were taken in late April, early May. This is Bardia National Park. And you can see that it almost looks like it was burned. You see a lot of the trees almost are defoliated. The grasses, the shrubs are all brown. This is from the heat and the lack of water. This is not from burning. And you can see my colleagues trying to walk through these trails. Well, there were no trails. We just made our own trails, and they're really hot. Part of the thing is that we had to wear long sleeves and long pants because of the insects issue. And actually, our colleagues from Nepal wore jackets, presumably that these jackets kept them cooler. I was not going to test that theory because I was warm enough already. So another challenge was to find the river. What seems like an easy task here in this country is not so in Nepal. The roads are not marked. The roads are not labeled. The roads are barely paved. And there's no signs to tell you which way to go. So this is how we navigated. We had our little Google Earth, and we stopped by the side of the road and asked people, where's the river? And everyone was extremely helpful, always giving us directions, pointing us to the best roads, the best way to get down to the river. But as you can see, there really aren't roads. This is what we drove on. Sometimes the guides that took us out, this fellow on the right is one of the guides that we had with us. They weren't sure how to find the river. Other times we got lost in the jungle, not really sure where we were and which way to go. But eventually we did get to the rivers, and then the challenge was to access some of these remote areas. In the background of this image, you see these cliffs. These are extremely high cliffs, and even though you might get to the river, you can't get down to the river to set your gear in there and to sample fishes. So this was also a challenge. Sometimes what we had to do was to just leave the trucks at the top of the hill and just march on down towards the river, find a suitable site. And if it worked for us, we'd come back to the truck, offload our gear, and bring all the gear down to the side of the river, to the riverbank. Other challenges were that these are very large fast flowing rivers. They're what we call braided rivers. There's a lot of islands in the center of these rivers. It's muddy, as you can see here, at the time of year that we went. And so it's not clear, is this river 2 inches deep or 20 feet deep? We don't know. Another challenge was when we set our gear and we hauled it in, we often had a lot of trash and plastics that fouled our gear. It was difficult to get some of our gear to work properly because of the amount of plastics just floating in the river and interfering with our sampling. Another site challenge was, this was the one we encountered on the first day, was we did find the river. We were able to make it down to the river bank, but the river was so shallow, it didn't even come up to our ankles. And so this wasn't a place where we could set our gear either. And so what we would often have to do is just walk down the river until it got deep enough, and then that would be the site where we would sample. Here I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey up on the Naraini River and into Chitwan National Park. What we see here are 2 boats that were waiting by the shore of the river. And as I came down to the riverbank that morning, I looked at the boats and I thought, oh, this is great, fantastic. And I said to the guide, that's great. I'm glad you found 2 boats because, you know, we can use one for the scientists and one for all our gear. And he looked at me and he said, no, you're all going in one boat. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but it did. We ended up all fitting in the boat along with all of our gear, along with 1 guide and 2 boat operators. And so if this works, I have some video that will give you a sense of what it was like on this muddy river. And so here we are paddling upstream, up the Naraini River to find a suitable sampling site. Some places the river got way too shallow, so we couldn't paddle the boat. So we were all told to get out and walk, and we walked the river. And other places we carried people just because we could. And other places we were actually able to put some of us in the boat and some of us walked alongside. Again, this is pretty shallow. You can see me sitting in the boat there with the camera, and I'll show you the video I took in a minute. In other places, you know, again, some of us were asked to get out of the boat so that the boatman could push the boat up the river. And here you see them with the boat full of our gear. Yes, at the bow of the boat are 4 plastic chairs. There's a plastic table in here. There's a lot of scientific gear and all these suitcases. And there's a couple of life jackets. So here you see my colleagues walking up one of the islands here as we're, again, trying to find a suitable site for sampling. And moving up the river. Whoops. Other places we got out, we encountered islands and we had to walk through this. Here we're walking through what's called elephant grass. This is really tall grass, and it's called that because elephants like to hide behind it. And remember my comment about this can kill you. Here we have our arrival at the site. You can see what the riverbanks look like. They're full of these large rounded rocks, very smooth rocks, but very difficult to walk on sometimes. And we're approaching the site where we will begin now to sample fish. So here's the site at the tip of that island. This is deep inside the national park. There's nothing near us. And here you see Bhaskar and Troy deploying what we call a gill net. And a gill net is just a mesh that we string across the river to capture fish. Now, you might be wondering what Troy is doing with a rice bag. It turns out that you need to put an anchor on a gill net in order to anchor it to the bottom of the stream or the river. And of course, you're not transporting anchors on airplanes, so we just use rice bags, fill them up with rocks, and proceeded to use those as anchors. Here you see Troy with one of the anchors and one end of the gill net, and Bhaskar on the other end. So the gill net, the top has flotation. So what did we use? Whatever we could find. So some small plastic water wings, some plastic bottles, and there's Vosker trying to go out into the middle of the river there with the other end of that gill net. So here's the gill net set in the river. It's not terribly deep, but the flow is unbelievable here. Really high flow. This is not what it would look like if you set a gill net in the York River. We had other gear that we used. On the left is Vosker trying his luck at hook and line, but that was just that one time. He didn't catch anything. Most of the time we used this net on the right, which is called a seine net, and we walk out into the river and sort of encircle an area and then bring that net back to shore. Another useful gear that is very popular in Nepal is this cast net, which Vosker is holding here on the left. And you see Troy throwing the cast net on the right. This gear is used by locals for their own fishing purposes. Other challenges we had in the field were actually trying to set up a small laboratory where we could collect the data from the fishes that we sampled. Most of the time in the Terai region, the temperatures hovered above 100 degrees every day. And so we were out there in this incredible heat and trying to stay cool, and we needed to find shade to do that and to set up our little lab. In one case, we actually set up right outside one of the hotels that was on the East Rapti River here. In another case, out in the western part of Nepal, we often would find these large trees that were really nice and shady. But for the most part, this is what our sites look like. Windy, sandy, and we set up this tarp where there's 8 people. There's going to be 8 ways to set this up. So that took the longest time to figure out which way we were going to do this. But that's how we set up our little camp. Here's another one where we use the back of the truck, the side of the truck, a fallen tree, or whatever we could find. And this gives you an idea of what we were doing out there. So here I am with a camera set up, and I was using the camera to collect a lot of the information on the fish. And the reason for this is that we had to return all fish alive to the rivers. Our permits did not allow us to kill any fish, so all the fish had to be returned alive. And then my colleagues were here collecting measurements, recording data, and then we would take turns fishing and bringing fish back in these buckets. At lunch, we would often take a break. Our Nepali colleagues always brought this amazing meal of fried rice and various other things. And then we were stuck with pretty much cheese sandwiches. And you can see that Vosker was not at all happy about having to eat a plain old cheese sandwich. But everywhere we went, we drew attention. If we were close to a village, all the children in the village would come out and they would want to see what we were doing. They would want to help. They would want to hold the fish. Of course, we wouldn't let them do that, but you know, they were very curious as to what we were trying to accomplish, and so it was just really interesting to meet these children and to interact with them. At one point, we were out in the middle of the Chitwan National Park, and that was that scene where you saw Vosker setting the gill net. And all of a sudden, we look up, and there are these 2 elephants coming out of the jungle with armed park rangers on them, and they are asking us who we are, what are we doing there, and if we have a permit. And here's Vosker standing on the side of the river here, trying to talk with these folks here and saying, yeah, we do have a permit. And so sure, they made us show it to them. So that was kind of an unusual thing. And you can see in the background here of this photograph of the smoke from the fires. People burn their trash in Nepal. And so the air quality is really, really poor. So now I want to turn my attention to the fishes and people of Nepal. To give you a sense of what we found. before we went to Nepal, we did some research on what we thought we might find, and based on one book, just about the only book published in this century on the ichthyology of Nepal, we were expecting to find about 100 species of fish. Most of these are small fish, minnows basically, but there might have been some big fish. There are stories. Something like this is called a goonch catfish, was captured in an area near Nepal. We didn't find this catfish, but we did find other species. Most of what we found were small fish, like the ones you see in the blue pan here on the left. In fact, some of them were so small that you see on the right, Troy is using a field microscope so that we can actually examine the fish to try and identify what fish species it is that we captured. We use this book to help us identify, and thankfully Raul knew many of the species, but this was really a difficult task. Most of these species had been described to science in the early 1800s, and really there's been very little research done since then. So the challenge for us was actually identifying what it was we were looking at. Once we identified the fish, we put them in photaria. This is a photarium that's holding a small fish here, and this is what was used to photograph the fish. On the left, you see Krishna holding up one of the photariums, and he's got a fish in there, and that's ready to be photographed. And then you see on the right here, Raul is measuring some of the characteristics of the fish. And these are the data that we collected while we were out there in the field. So what did we find? In terms of species of fish, we found 33 species and possibly 34. We're not sure about that one. We'll need to get together with some taxonomists that can help us identify that, what we had. And a total of 518 individual fish. So 518 fishes. The most common one is shown here. This is Puntius tirio. It is the one-spot barb. It is a fish that you might be familiar with if you keep fish in aquarium. A lot of the species of aquarium fishes that we have in the United States actually come from this part of Asia. In terms of the numbers of species, I'll talk about what we found in the two parks. So remember the Karnali and the Babai River, and the East Rapti and Naraini River on the east. This is a table, but I just want you to focus mostly on this total. So this is the number of species, 20 different species in the Karnali and 19 in the Naraini. These are the northwest rivers, and the north-south rivers, and the east-west rivers, the Babai and the East Rapti rivers, had fewer species, 12 and 14. What we see generally is inside the national parks, we had at least half, if not more than half, of the total number of species were found inside the park. So that kind of gave us a sense that maybe these parks are protecting fish biodiversity. In terms of numbers of individuals, we see the same kind of story. Here's the total on the bottom here, and the total for outside the park. You can see that number is very low. In the buffer zone, it gets a little higher, and inside the park, it's higher still. But more than half of the individuals that we captured within the national park boundaries. These are a few images of some of the species that I thought were the coolest. This is the needlefish. It's a piscivorous fish. It attacks other fish. It eats other fish. It has really nasty teeth that, if you're not careful, can be quite not fun. This is another one that I really liked. It's a barred spiny eel. We don't have anything like this in the United States, but this was a fairly common one inside the national park. And then here's an image. This is a video. And before I started, I'm going to tell you that you should be able to see at least 3 fish here in this image. They're hard to see, and even I have difficulty sometimes. So let me start the video. Now you see them moving. These are loaches, and you see that their interesting behavior is that they're feeding off the bottom. They stir up the bottom and eat whatever whatever is hiding in the sand or in the mud. This particular species of loach, I don't know what it is. I think it might be something that has not yet been described, at least not for that part of Nepal. We also saw a golden Massier, and the Massier is a legendary fish in Asia. It can get to be 9 feet long, 119 pounds, although those were the days. It is no longer seen in those sizes. It's an endangered species according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, but it is a threatened species in Nepal and India. This was probably the largest individual that we encountered when we were there. But this golden Massier is also the target of many recreational anglers, and many people pay a lot of money to go out to Bardia National Park to fish for this species. Of course, they're catching bigger ones than what we are holding here. And so this idea here about endangered and threatened species in Nepal is an important one. We barely know what species are there, let alone what their status is. And I'm having trouble again with the slide advance. Okay. So one of the reasons is that Nepal has a lot of security issues. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were developed by the United Nations. And these are some of the ones that really plague Nepal: food security, clean water, and clean energy. This is really hard to come by in Nepal. And here we are looking at life below water, so conservation of fishes and diversity of fishes. If we look at what was published in the Himalayan Times last year, there was an estimate that Nepal must invest 5.5 billion rupees a day to meet the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. That 5.5 billion a day is 58% of their GDP. So that isn't going to happen anytime soon. In fact, most of the people that we encountered were living a subsistence living life. So this is outside of the cities, clearly. But for example, here the woman on the right had come down to the river that morning to collect wood so that she could go home and cook her meals. There's also heavy fishing pressure. So anyone that lives near any river is using these rivers as a source of protein. There's an image here on the left. These folks are holding a big blue net, and they just drag the net through the water, catching anything and everything and eating everything they catch, of course. Fishing continues morning, noon, and night. On the right is a photo from an evening walk along the Naraini River that we took, and we could see fishers out there fishing into the dark. These rivers also are threatened by a lot of activities that go to supporting infrastructure. Here this was a common sight. These cranes sitting in the middle of the river, removing rocks to build roads. And what we see here in all these images are these sort of wooden structures, kind of V-shaped wooden structures. Here you see one out of the water. These are called weirs, fishing weirs. This is what many people use to collect fishes, and you can see that the water funnels through here, and at the end is a little net, and so this thing is fishing constantly, 24/7, and people come in and then remove the fish from the trap. There's habitat destruction from just daily activities. There are no roads, so you can imagine there's not many bridges either. So people just drive across these rivers, and they drive trucks with rocks, they drive tractors, they drive whatever. So that is not a really a sustainable practice in terms of habitat for fishes. And then finally, we saw this. This is shoreline armoring. It's hard to get a perspective on this, but this is going for miles and miles and miles. And you can see this armoring that has been put in place along the banks of this river. These are all rocks, and they're held together in place by some, I don't know what this is, it looks like fencing. But this is really, really high slopes here. And this just went on as far as we could see. This shoreline armoring is very important. Right now, at the time of year that we were there, the rivers were very low because it's the dry season. But once the monsoon comes, which was just about after, I think it was 2 weeks after we left, it started raining. And there was so much rain coming down these rivers that that people need to put this armoring in order to protect their land. These rivers can rage quite fast, and in fact, I think it was in 2018 that after the monsoon, they found that I don't know how many rhinoceroses had been swept out of Chitwan National Park because the waters rose so high and it was such a strong flow. So if it can move a rhinoceros, I think it can move just about anything. All right, so finally, I want to talk a little bit about how we accomplished our work. We did a lot there, but we did it because we had support on the ground. And this gentleman, Manos died, is Vaskar's brother-in-law. And he was there before we even arrived in Nepal to help us work with customs, to help us get our equipment through customs, to help us find our packages in customs. And he was just amazing, spent an incredible amount of time on behalf of our work to make sure that we could get our gear and get the project started on time. In addition, of course, we had our research team with the folks from Nepal, and these three folks that we worked with from Nepal, we never met before. We did not know them. Now we are brothers and sisters. And these folks are just amazing, and everyone got along. No one had any issues. It was an incredible team, and it was just a lovely place and a lovely time. We also had family support back home. On the left is our home family here in the US. This is our spouses and our children, and they supported us with everything that we did, and were always ready to wire us money if we needed it, but fortunately we didn't. And then on the right side there, you see our family in Nepal. This is, again, Vaskar's in-laws, his mother and father-in-law, his brother and sister-in-law, and their family, so his nieces and nephews. They all took us in. They invited us to dinner there. This was in Kathmandu. And we had a wonderful time with them, and learning about what they do, and of course they learning about us. And we also visited with Hamanta's family in Pokhara, and here we are at his home, and they invited us to their home and fed us also. We have to thank the drivers who drove us around in the truck and the Jeep, Santos and Sanjay. They were just fantastic. They were the happiest people you ever want to meet. And they were just a fun group of people. The first time that we were out there and we were throwing cast nets around, they were laughing at us because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have the Nepali technique. So they showed us how to do it, and they actually fished for us. They didn't have to do that. They weren't getting paid to be researchers, but they did. They just jumped in because they really enjoyed being out there and working with us. We also have to thank the permit guy. I don't remember his name, but he in Kathmandu got us through all that bureaucracy, and it was great that he could help us. And that's how happy I was when we got that permit, because we weren't able to set foot in any national park without that permit. It was amazing. Took us almost a year to get it. The park guides were phenomenal. These folks were associated with the lodges where we stayed, and they were the locals. They knew where to go. They knew what to do. It was wonderful working with them. And of course, the enthusiasm. The team was always enthusiastic, no matter how lost we might have seemed, or how uncertain we were of where we were going or what we would do next. We were always enthusiastic about it, working together and getting through our research challenges. Teaching and learning occurred in the field. We taught our colleagues many things. They taught us many more things. It was a really collaborative experience. we had an opportunity to visit the Agriculture and Forestry University, where Raul is a professor. So we were there for an afternoon working with the students there and interacting with them. In fact, we left all of our equipment there in Nepal, and we donated it to the university. So they have some resources for education. We were invited to present our thoughts about fisheries to the Zoological Society of Pokhara, and we did that. Here's the audience at the university, and you can see that their presentations are very, very formal affairs. So we each had our topi, we had our ceremonial scarves, we have certificates of appreciation, we have coffee mugs, we had tea. It was just an amazing experience. And now I want to end, if I can have another minute of your time, I want to end with showing you one of the trips that we took. This is a river reconnaissance. So this is what we would do before we would set out to sample. We would kind of scope out the river and check out different places where we might sample. So this is in Bardia National Park in the western part of Nepal, where I said very few people go. So here we are, we're loaded up in a rubber raft going down the Karnali River. So here's a river, it's beautiful, it's wide, there's lots of grasslands, there's jungle behind it, it's fast flowing, some areas are shallow, some are deep. And we come around the bend and we spot a rhino in the water ahead of us. And he spots us. Uh-oh, that was scary. Well, let me run the video of what actually happened here. So here you see there's two rhinos. There's a female and there's a male. And we had pulled off on the side of the river there, and we started, you heard that sound, we started smacking the ground to kind of scare them out of our way. And here they go, the female first and followed by the male leaving the water. And they were really upset with us. And then we finally figured out why. So in Bardia National Park, there are only 22 one-horned rhinos. These are an endangered species, one-horned rhinos, 22 of them. And we saw 2 of them right there. And that was probably their date night. So I think they have a right to be upset with us. And then at the end of the trip, we saw this, the Bengal tiger. So that was a very special moment for us all. And I want to thank you for joining me today and talking about this trip to Nepal. It really is a wonderful experience. Dhanyabad. And if you want to connect with VIMS, there's ways you can do this. You can text VIMS to 22828 to get our monthly news and events and e-tidings, or you can visit our website for public programs, or you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And I'm happy to take any questions or discuss anything about this trip that you would like to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We've had a few questions come in the chat box just while you were talking, so I'll read you a few of those, and then if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in if you want, or when I'm done with these, you can even unmute yourself and ask them. So one of the first ones was, how long were you actually in the field? How many days?
Yes, thank you for that question. Well, we were in Nepal for just a little over 3 weeks, and I think we spent maybe 4 or 5 days in the cities. So more than 2 weeks for sure.
Okay, and then did many people speak English there, or how was it with communicating people while you were there?
Yeah, well, Bhaskar, who is from Nepal, speaks Nepali. So did everyone else. So basically, Troy and I were the only English-speaking people there. In the lodges where we stayed, some of the people spoke a little bit of English, but most people did not speak English. But they're really, it wasn't hard to communicate with people. People are very warm. People are very friendly, and yeah, not many people speak English. The kids do. The kids do. In fact, when I was sitting out in one of the field sites, a little girl had come up to me and she wondered what I was doing. Of course, I didn't understand what she was asking me. But she picked up my book. She picked up the book that you saw, The Ichthyology of Nepal. And she opened up the book and she started pointing to a fish. And she looked up at me and she said, fish. So she knew the word for fish in English. And so I started saying, I started teaching her other words. I started teaching her tail and scales. And so it was really, really interesting. I think the children know more English, probably because they get it on through the internet. That would be my guess, or maybe even in schools.
Okay. And then there was a question about kind of the timing of receiving the permit and leaving for Nepal. Did you get the permit before you left, or did you have to wait until you got there?
Yeah, so the plan was to have the permit in hand before we left the United States, but that did not happen. So our colleagues, Hemanta was in Pokhara, which is about 5 to 8 hours from Kathmandu. Rahul was in Chitwan, which is also about 5 to 8 hours from Kathmandu. So they weren't able to travel to Kathmandu to help us with that process. And so it just took a long, long time. A lot of it had to do with not understanding why we wanted to be there, what we wanted to do, what type of gear we were using. And a lot of it has to do with their bureaucracy. It's just very different from ours, where we're just a little bit more efficient in terms of permits. There, you need to contact almost every subdivision within the park system to get a permit. So we did not have the permit in hand. What we did have was a text message that we received when we were in Dulles Airport, getting ready to board the flight to Dubai, that yes, the permit had been issued. And so we got on board the plane. But I had said to Bhaskar, if we don't have that permit, we're not getting on board this plane. And so it came in literally at the last minute.
Wow, great. And then somebody asked, it seems like Nepal has an extensive national park system. And given the fundamental challenges facing the country, what's your sense for if those parks will continue to be supported, or how they're supported in the future?
Yeah, no, I believe Nepal is very aware that the national parks are their jewel. They are very aware that this rare wildlife that they have is really important to promoting tourism. And so, yes, I believe that they will do everything they can to ensure that those parks persist. In fact, they have been moving. There's a lot more of the one-horned rhinos in Chitwan National Park, and so they've been moving them over to Bardia to try to establish a breeding population in Bardia National Park. Unfortunately, they did that just before there was an uprising, and so poaching increased, and they lost, well, I'd say more than half the rhinos they transplanted to poach. Yeah, so their big issue really is enforcement of the rules and regulations, and also the political unrest. And now, of course, with COVID, their borders are completely shut down, and so yeah, it's going to be tough. But I think the national parks in Nepal are they know what they have, and they are protecting them.
Betsy wanted to know, what was your big cultural takeaway from Nepal? So another way to think of it, is there a particular characteristic of the culture there that you will think of and remember as distinct to kind of that region?
Wow. I can't say that there's one thing about the culture wow, that's a really good question. I mean, all I can say is I feel like when I was there, I felt like everyone I met was my family. Everyone, I could trust anyone and everyone. It's just something so unusual in this country, in the US, especially growing up in New York City, right? You don't trust anyone, right? But out there, no, you trusted everybody. So let me give you an example. And you might think I'm stupid for this, but it took me a while, and I realized it was okay. We had $15,000 that we took with us in cash over to the country. And the reason we took that much money was because credit cards really won't work for you in the jungle. Um, so, uh, so we had to use cash. We had to use cash to pay for everything, including the trucks, the truck drivers, the guides, the boats, everything we paid for in cash. And it was all negotiated right there on the spot. So here I was carrying that backpack. You saw me walking through the woods with a backpack. That was full of $15,000 worth of cash.
Yeah.
Bali rupees, which is like 15 million. That backpack was chock full of money. And at first I would drag that thing out with me because I didn't want to lose it, obviously. But then about 3 days into the trip, Vaskar said to me, you could just leave that in the room. Nobody is going to take it. And I couldn't believe him, but that was very true. That's what I did. I just left it. I just said, that's it, nobody is going to take this. So that's how important, personal integrity is to the people there.
Great. I'll ask one more question that was typed in, and then if anybody has like a final one before we go, and then I know Valerie close things up. But Lynn Dillon wanted to know if, given the opportunity to return to Nepal, are there other goals or objectives that you would want to complete to complement your initial research?
Yes, we're hoping to return to Nepal, and what we want to do the next time is we want to continue the work that we started, because clearly there's some signal here that perhaps the parks are effective in protecting aquatic biodiversity. So that is something that if we can help the parks establish, then I think it would really go a long way towards helping them with their fundraising and with their tourism, etc. But to do this next time, I think what we would prefer to do is to work with the local fishers. So we would hire local people who make a living fishing, right? And we would work with them collaboratively rather than doing that ourselves. Mainly because we watched at night a group of young boys fishing the river that we had fished in the afternoon and caught only a handful of fish. They went at night and did an amazing job of catching a lot of fish, and a lot of big fish in the same spot we were fishing. So I'm pretty sure we weren't using the right gear, the right time, the right techniques. And so that's what we want to do. We want to work more with the community and get them involved.
Big thank you to Mary and Sally. Mary, it's one thing to do the research, but to take the time that you did to capture beyond the details that you were trying to capture so that we could all experience the trip with you and your experiences with you is so greatly appreciated. And a big shout out to FIMS as a whole. I had the occasion to sit on the Rappahannock River on a dock this past weekend, and was reminded again just how beautiful that area is and how important the work that VIMS does to protect our waterways. And so a big shout out to VIMS as a whole and the work that you do partnering with the Commonwealth to do that. So thanks to everyone who participated.
Thank you so much.
Good night all.